This week on Jerusalem Dateline, Palestinian violence surges in the wake of President Trump's deal of the century. Where will the trouble lead? And Jerusalem, the thorniest issue. Palestinians say they want more than what they've been offered. Plus, how an Israeli innovation could help stop the deadly coronavirus and fulfill biblical prophecy too. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. Israel's defense forces and Israeli police are on high alert after dozens of Israeli soldiers have been injured while 3 Palestinians have died in recent clashes. The fighting began days after the release of President Trump's deal of the century. From Gaza to Judea and Samaria to Jerusalem, Palestinians have rioted and demonstrated against the White House's peace proposal to finally bridge the gap between Palestinians and Israelis. One of the latest terror attacks took place here outside Jerusalem's old train station on Thursday. A terrorist drove his car into a group of Israeli soldiers and wounded 12, one seriously. Another attack came next to Jerusalem's Temple Mount, where an Israeli Arab opened fire on police Thursday. Moments later, he was killed. Hamas and Islamic Jihad, both of which are backed by Iran, support these terror attacks.
The Islamic resistance movement, Hamas, blesses the struggle and these heroic operations against the Zionist occupation, its rejection of the so-called deal of the century, and blocking it from passing.
For its part, the Palestinian Authority instructed its security services not to pursue Palestinian terrorists. And even before the release of President Trump's plan, warned Palestinians not to support it.
Whoever accepts it, he will pay a heavy price for it. Yes, he will pay the price for accepting it. He will pay the price of treason. Accepting this deal is the way to treason.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu put the blame on PA President Mahmoud Abbas, also known as Abu Mazen.
And I want to say something to Abu Mazen. This is not going to help you. Not the stabbings, not the car rammings, not the shootings, and not the incitement. We will do whatever is necessary to defend our security, to determine our borders, and to secure our future. We will do it with you or without you.
Itamar Marcus, who monitors Palestinian media, says the PA is fueling the resistance.
The Palestinian Authority wants violence. It wants terror. It wants the world to know that its people are angry about the Trump plan. Whether its people are angry or not, we don't know. We know the leadership is angry. It could be that the people would like peace, but the leadership is interested in a terror wave.
Israel's national police spokesman told CBN News the police don't know yet if these terror attacks will lead to still another wave of terror or simply die down. Israelis and some Palestinians hope and pray this won't become a new campaign of terror in the streets of Jerusalem and throughout the land. Jerusalem has always been the most contentious issue in Israeli-Palestinian negotiations, and it's no different now with President Trump's deal of the century. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas rejected Jerusalem as the undivided capital of Israel.
Shortly after it was unveiled, saying a Palestinian state without Jerusalem, I immediately rejected the solution. I will not have it recorded in my history and the history of the country that I sold Jerusalem.
U.S. Ambassador to Israel David Friedman explained the Jerusalem part of the deal.
Jerusalem is an undivided city within a security barrier, and under the Trump plan, that undivided city within the security barrier will be 100% under Israeli sovereignty, with the Temple Mount retaining the status quo.
The Temple Mount is under Israeli security control and Jordanian religious authority.
Beyond the security barrier, you still have municipal Jerusalem. And in that area, there is territory earmarked for a Palestinian capital.
Abu Dis is part of that area, but Abu Dis Mayor Ahmad Abu Hilal told CBN News that's a non-starter.
We refuse that thing. For me, I'm as the mayor of Abu Dis, I refuse to be the capital of Palestine. I'm a part of Jerusalem.
In 1996, the Palestinian Authority broke ground to build a parliament building in Abu Dis. It was going to be their Jerusalem seat of government, but the building was never completed.
They built the parliament because use Abu Dis is the part of Jerusalem. They have no walls here. Now they put in the walls.
Israel built the security barrier in Jerusalem more than 15 years ago at the height of the Second Palestinian Intifada to prevent terrorists from entering the city. From a rooftop in Abu Dis overlooking the security barrier and Jerusalem beyond, it's easy to see how the two sides were once one.
We used to work here, we go into Jerusalem. Before the wall, every night we be in Jerusalem watching the cinema.
This is El Azariah, a mostly Muslim town under the Palestinian Authority, just over a mile from Jerusalem. It's also known as Bethany in the Bible, the place where Jesus raised Lazarus from the dead. Al Azariah Mayor Issam Faroun said the Trump plan misses the point about Jerusalem.
The importance of this area, Lazariah, Abu Dis, and other villages here, have its importance because we are surrounding Jerusalem. Without our Jerusalem, we are nothing here.
I'm telling you, I hope so. The peace is coming back. That's what we need. Everybody needs the peace. The peace is good for everybody.
But with the Palestinian rejection of the plan, it's not likely a peace deal will be signed anytime soon. Julie Stahl, CBN News, Abu Dis and Al Azariah.
Coming up, more on the deal of the century and how Christians should respond. As we've heard, the Palestinian Authority leadership has rejected the deal of the century outright and are urging their people to fight it. Israelis, on the other hand, have had a mixed reaction. But how should Christians respond, and how should they pray? I spoke with International Christian Embassy Jerusalem Vice President and Senior Spokesman David Parsons about the plan. Parsons has followed Israeli-Palestinian negotiations for nearly 30 years. All right, David, after several years, finally the deal of the century is out now. What's your first reaction?
We've been teased for almost 2.5 years with this plan, and a little surprised it came out in the middle of this Israeli election. But not many Israelis are complaining about it because it is so pro-Israel. You look at some of the terms of it. Israel would have security control from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean, sort of freezing of a status quo, control of the airspace. The Palestinians wouldn't be able to have an army. There would be no return of Palestinian refugees, which is a big one. So these are very positive, important points. I think you could actually expect this out of the Trump administration because they already recognize Jerusalem, recognize Israeli sovereignty on the Golan, said the settlements are legal, and many other things that they did to help Israel, but there's still I'd say I'm cautiously receptive to it because in the middle of the plan, it would call for a Palestinian state if the Palestinians meet all the conditions that are set forth, and that's a division of the land contrary to Scripture, which should give us all pause.
Yeah. Is that one of your main objections about the fact that this is, according to the Bible, land given by God to the Jewish people?
I think it is a concern. I respect the people who put this plan together, Jason Greenblatt, Jared Kushner, Ambassador Friedman. They're all Jewish. They were all very supportive of the Israeli settlements beforehand. I don't think they do anything to endanger Israel. I think they have an understanding, perhaps with Israel, how this thing rolls out, expecting a Palestinian rejection and what happens next. But I think there's been a little confusion. And I'm still trying to figure out, Chris, as a former practicing attorney, traditionally, the U.S. administrations would propose an outline for peace, give some suggestions how to handle all the issues, and invite the two parties in with U.S. mediation to come to an agreement. But this seems to be like what we call in the law an adhesion contract, take it or leave it. It's already set, and you have to accept it from the start, and some things that have been said already sort of present it like that. And I think they anticipated a Palestinian rejection. And the question is, what is the understanding between the U.S. and Israel if Israel annexes 30% of the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, like the plan calls for, at the start, the Palestinians reject it, and where do we go next?
That is my next question. Where do you think we do go next?
Well, I think Abbas, he hasn't wanted to pick up the phone to talk to Trump all these years. I think he's going to try to wait out Trump over the next 7-8 months to see if he gets reelected. I think a lot of the world is doing that. He's already turning to the European Union, the United Nations, to try and get some counter proposal. And I don't think that'll be very effective. But I think the plan itself, because if it's already a set deal that there's not much to change, it sets up the U.S. as a sort of judge of the Palestinians finally getting a state after 4 years. And the threshold is high, including they have to disarm Hamas, which, as you and I know, Hamas won't give up its weapons. So, you know, to get a state, Abbas has to trigger an internal civil war among the Palestinians. And so I don't think the Palestinians are going to accept it. They're going to try and outlast Trump, see if he doesn't get reelected. But if he does, I think there's some understanding that's not out there about how to proceed in this, the plan itself and the provisions for a Palestinian state. The U.S. will try and say, well, that's passed now, the Palestinians rejected it, we need to move on from here.
Yeah. Finally, David, how can people be praying about this?
We need to lift up the Israeli people in the election coming up in just a few weeks, because this is a central part of it. There needs, I believe, part of why Trump released his plan at this time is to give Israel a way out of this impasse they've had, third election now. And I think we need to really invest a lot of prayer in that the Israeli people would coalesce around an agreement to, you know, for now we can solidify our hold on another 30% of this territory that we won in '67, and the world keeps trying to talk us out of it. Let's solidify our grip in some sort of unity government between blue and white and Likud, and somehow with Benjamin Netanyahu in place. That's our sense that that's what we need to be praying for.
Yeah, well, David, thank you for your sharing your analysis. You've been following this since back in the early 90s, so thanks so much. Up next, why a united Jerusalem is so important to Israel. We've talked a lot about Jerusalem this week. Here's a story CBN's Scott Ross did a few years ago about why the idea of dividing Jerusalem has long been a deal breaker for the Jewish people.
Jerusalem's old city, the Temple Mount, and the Mount of Olives all share common bonds. In addition to biblical significance, they're all in the part of the city Palestinians want as their future capital.
Scripture says Jerusalem is a city set on a hill.
And we are standing on the hill, the Mount of Olives, and we are overlooking the Temple Mount. Beautiful vision here of the old city, and behind it the new city.
Chaim Silberstein, founder and president of Keep Jerusalem, believes the city must remain united. We spent a day looking at Jerusalem from different angles to understand its complexity.
This is a city that's ensconced in geopolitics, in divisiveness, both within the Jewish people and certainly the Arab nations against the Jewish people.
Jerusalem has been conquered more than any other city in history, yet it's been the only capital the Jewish people have ever known. Still, the world refuses to recognize it as Israel's capital, even though it's mentioned more than 640 times in the Old Testament and not once by name in the Quran.
Jerusalem is the capital of Israel.
We know that over 3,000 years ago, King David came here, he conquered Jerusalem, and he set up his capital here. And for 1,000 years, Israel had sovereignty, the Jews had sovereignty in the land of Israel. A pocket of Jews remained in Palestine, in Israel, throughout the centuries. But we only saw a real return of the Jewish people in the last 150 years or so. And today, when we look at Jerusalem, we see Jerusalem built up.
At what point was it that the Arabs, the Palestinians, made a determination that this was their capital?
It was only when the Israelis liberated Jerusalem in '67 that they changed that, because they needed to get us out. So they then created this idea that they want a Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital.
On the world stage, Jerusalem is typically divided between East and West. The newer Western city is primarily Jewish. The older Eastern section stretches from north to south. The majority of the city's Arabs live there, but so do an almost equal number of Jewish Israelis.
With the city as it is now and the talk of dividing Jerusalem, is that realistic? A divided Jerusalem?
I think that it would be a disaster of historic proportions and a huge mistake, because dividing up Jerusalem will create the exact opposite effect of peace.
From 1949 to 1967, Jerusalem was divided, with Jordan controlling the eastern sector. During 1967's Six-Day War, Israel took back control. Silverstein took me to the battlefield that turned the tide.
This is the actual spot where hand-to-hand combat took place here, is that correct?
Correct. This is probably the toughest battle in Jerusalem during the Six-Day War. Between the west and Mount Scopus was Ammunition Hill, so it was critical to take this hill.
The Bible calls Jerusalem the city of the great king, and it's seen many kings. In 1964, Jordan's King Hussein started building a hilltop palace on the northern edge of Jerusalem. The Six-Day War interrupted his plans.
This site where we are now is not really the palace of King Hussein, but rather the palace of King Saul.
From on high, it's easy to see why kings old and new would want to occupy this hill.
We're looking eastwards, and we're actually looking into the Judean desert. Behind the Judean desert are the mountains of Moab, which is where Jordan is today.
Oh.
So we can see all the way to the Dead Sea and the Jordan Valley. What we see below us is the Jewish neighborhood of Pisgat Ze'ev, and to the north of that, Neve Yaakov. These two neighborhoods are basically nestled within Arab neighborhoods that are surrounding them. If we would cut off Jerusalem and say everything to the left of this line would be Palestine, 90,000 Jews living in these two neighborhoods would find themselves in Palestine.
How can you divide them when they're so integrated?
That is a rhetorical question.
It is.
Yes.
Looking to the north, we could see biblical Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank. In the distance, just 5 miles from Jerusalem, is Ramallah, the current seat of government for the Palestinian Authority.
An important thing to understand when you want to understand the strategic issues facing Jerusalem is what is the goal of the Arabs. They understand that Jerusalem is the heart of the Jewish people, and if they can liberate Jerusalem from their point of view, then they will have succeeded in liberating Israel ultimately.
Silverstein believes the Arabs have three main ways they're working to liberate Jerusalem: by force, propaganda and diplomacy, and demography.
What they're doing is building and building and building inside Jerusalem, largely illegal structures. In fact, have successfully created a territorial continuum that runs from Ramallah in the north, all the way through Jerusalem, through the Old City, to Bethlehem in the south. And by doing that, they would have infiltrated a demographic Trojan horse inside Jerusalem.
Do you have hope for this city to eventually be whole? Do you see a good future ahead or no?
Zechariah chapter 14 talks about what's happening here on the Mount of Olives. There'll be an earthquake here, there'll be a war, there'll be all kinds of unnatural things that are happening here.
That's yet to happen.
That's yet to happen in the future. But Zechariah ends the prophecy by saying, and Jerusalem will dwell secure. The question is how we will get there. The thing that is guaranteed to bring peace to Jerusalem is keeping Jerusalem united under Israeli sovereignty. And that certainly is the prelude to hopefully the incredible event that we hope and pray will happen later, which will be ultimate peace both to Jerusalem and the world.
Scott Ross, Jerusalem.
Still ahead, how revolutionary Israeli technology could help stop the spread of the coronavirus and fulfill biblical prophecy too. The coronavirus is spreading throughout the world, claiming more lives every day. But revolutionary technology developed in the heart of Jerusalem could change everything. Argamon is an Israeli company that creates cutting-edge antiviral face masks that can kill viruses on contact.
But it kills all viruses, all bacteria, all fungus. And it will do it 100% of the time, all day, all night, 7 days a week. You can wash it, you can bleach it, you can dye it, you can hit it with a baseball bat. It's going to do its job.
The engineers use invisible sound waves to inject antiviral properties onto cotton. That cotton can be used to make face masks, hospital bedding, and much more.
I designed this mask together with the Hong Kong government, and what's fresh off the press is that as of last night, they dropped the N95 and they've adopted our Israeli standard.
The company's president says his work is part of biblical prophecy.
Our blessing should go to the world. We should be the light upon nations. And I think that that's a fulfillment of the prophecies. And thank God, we live in a time when we can do that.
Argamon is working to make their products available to the rest of the world very soon. It's just one example of how Israeli innovation is saving lives. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.